I want teams, leaders, everybody to be intentional in their preparation. I think you can navigate the unknown much better and much more efficiently if you prepare properly.
Who doesn't want to be a great leader? A leader who's calm under pressure, insightful, respected, well-liked. But what does it take to become a great leader? Hey, I'm Boo, and welcome to my podcast. The Few Leadership Podcast defines great leadership and what great leadership looks like. And I've found some of the world's best leaders or experts in the field of leadership to help you accelerate your leadership journey so you can be an ace at the game of leadership. If you're ready to rethink everything you know about leadership, if you're excited about accelerating your leadership journey, let's strap in and ignite your leadership potential. Welcome back, team, to another episode of The Few. Hope you're all making inroads with your leadership journeys, that you're embracing that curiosity, accepting the fact that we can't be perfect, but hey, let's get as close as we can to that perfect outcome. Very excited by today's guest. Oh yeah, don't forget to like this podcast, by the way. Leave some comments, leave a review, because it's through that we end up getting the rock stars that we get to speak to on this show. This was a no-brainer for me. It's going to be an easy podcast. It's going to be fun. What we're going to do is really explore some elements of the military and the style of leadership. One of the most unique things about leadership within the framework of the military is every officer in the military is trained as an officer first, as a leader. And we immerse deeply in the subject and the literature of leadership in an environment where you have to deliver results, because without making too big a deal of it or without overplaying this particular element of military leadership, is people's lives depend on the decisions that leaders make. And I personally think there is an opportunity to take elements from that world across into yours. If you look at the golden age within the US of growth, it was on the back of World War II in the 50s and 60s, often referred to as the GI generation, that not only brought the skill sets of being in the military, but also the humanness of being in a pretty horrible situation for many years and really understanding the value of humanity and just how important it is to care for each other and how important it is to bring people together. And whilst we probably don't get a lot of this as ex-military folks, as veterans, is the soft skills of human leadership as much as the hard skills. So Joe McNamara, mate, great to see you again. We've had the opportunity to have many conversations. Thanks so much for taking the time. Super grateful for you coming on the show today. How you doing?
I'm fired up, Bo. It is. It's always a good time with you, my friend.
Always, man, always. So this is pretty cool, because you're one of the few that's made that segue from military into business, and then also the transition into speaking and sharing those insights. What do you believe is both the biggest challenge with organizations embracing some of the philosophies we have as leadership from the military, but also maybe the lost opportunity for a lot of organizations?
Sure. That is a packed question to start this.
Yeah, man, we just throw the ball up there.
That's right. And
great.
The biggest thing that we see, and it's kind of the premise of my work and my teammates' work with the things we are able to dive into, is the military, especially, in my world as a United States Marine, is the concept and the ability to create leaders at every single level. And we do that by at least the highest performing teams. It's not everybody, but at least the highest performing teams that I've been around. It's this concept of we build thinkers at every level. And, in that transition out, probably the biggest opportunity that I see running into, it doesn't matter the industry. We work in all different types of industries. I get to meet some awesome people and great leaders in all of these areas, but it's the vast majority kind of have this top-down leader follower structure, where there's a few people at the top who have all of the information. They retain all of the authority to make decisions. They have all of the control at the top. And sometimes that's intentional, but you will just give them the benefit of the doubt. Even unintentionally, what that starts to create is a bunch of passive followers on the layers underneath of them. People who will just shut their brains off because they're not being asked to think. They're not being asked to solve problems. They're not being asked to take initiative. And in our world, I was a ground force commander. I know you're on the air side, and it's, that was just not, we didn't have that luxury. right? As I was operating in a distributed environment, if I had to be the one that was making all the decisions and pulling everything close to me, and I didn't have guys fully engaged, thinking one or two, three levels above where they're at, we just wouldn't have been successful. And so that is the widest net that we lean in, is how do we create this culture of thinkers and start to trust our smaller unit leaders and junior leaders to make some pretty big time decisions when the stakes are high.
I think you've alluded to it here. And I think one of the biggest myths that people have around being a military leader is that we just have a whole bunch of people that follow orders. You can bust that myth. I mean, you're not in an environment where you're just ordered to do stuff and you blindly follow orders, right?
They do those guys exist? Sure. Are they successful? No. It is a mentor of mine at one time. He said, life's not about relationships. It's all about relationships. And at the end of the day, leadership, no matter what you're doing, military or not, it's about influence in the way that you build relationships in order to get the most out of your team. If you want to stand there and bark orders, you'll never come close to getting the type of performance and team reaching the potential that you could do.
I'd like to unpack your very first leadership experience, because I would imagine for you that in the Marines, when you come in as a young lieutenant and you're given your first unit to command, within that unit, there's some pretty senior guys and there's some pretty experienced guys. Tell me a little bit about what it was like when you took command for the very first time out of your own basic training.
Yeah. And in our pipeline, the Marine Corps pipeline, the officer pipeline, especially on the infantry side of the house, it's long, right? And it does an incredible job of preparing us. In my time, good, bad, or ugly, it was just, I was trained by everybody who came out of, OIF-1 and Fallujah, Ramadi, all these different areas. And so we had some incredibly experienced leaders that were pouring into us. That also meant that it was tough because they knew the realities of it. And by the time I finished our pipeline and I stepped in front of my first platoon, to your exact point, these are 18 to 24, 25-year-old men who have had multiple combat deployments under their belt at that time. And I will never forget it, because you feel like you're ready until you step in front of those guys for the first time. And I can remember sitting there and, feeling, okay, it's real now, right? And going back to really kind of what you just alluded to, I might be the commander, but that's title only, right? No one really cares. And I'll never forget, one of the young Marines looked at me and he said, "Hey, our last platoon commander got shot in the face on the last deployment, didn't make it home." He's like, "So we don't know how long you'll be here," right? I was like, "Whoa, welcome to the show." Right?
A little bit different to your first role as a sales lead, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, and that's where it hits you, is like, man, this is, nobody cares, right, about what's on this collar. They don't need friends. They don't need, they don't need a buddy. They need a leader, and they need someone who's going to pour onto them, prepare them for what's to come. And that was kind of that smack in the face of like, I got a ways to go to build some influence with these guys and build this reputation. And so I think for me, I think character makes the man, right? And having the humility to sit there and be willing to show that, to go, "Hey guys, teach me." Like, I might be in charge, technically in charge, right? Share it, teach me. What can I learn from you? And being open to that, I think, accelerated my ability to connect with those guys and learn from them, because we had a short turnaround. They came back from Iraq. We had a short, I think it was like 6-7 month workup, and we were right back into Afghanistan. And so they had a lot of experience, but yeah, stepping in front of experienced people who know a whole lot more than you do is a feeling that I'll never forget.
And what size team was that? Your first leadership role? How many folks are in that team?
Yeah, our straight up task organization at that time, with no other attachments or things, was about 42 Marines.
Okay, so here you are. You've gone from nothing. You've gone from 42 pretty experienced dudes that you're leading. I presume there's a few other greenhorns in there for the mix. But within that model, would you say that you had 42 leaders within there, that everyone had at least a task or the ability to step in and lead at any moment?
To your point, some have more experience than others. I would say that is what makes, the United States Marine Corps and our process so dang effective, is that is our expectation. Everybody leads at some level. Now, scope and authority might be a little bit different, but even down to that young new green guy, the vast majority of his time is learning how to be a follower in there. But we teach them and we put them and give them those opportunities to step up, so that when their moment does come, they're prepared. And that's just something I think we do so well in the Marine Corps is how do you get the most out of somebody is you treat them like a leader. And so that scope and the authority, like I said, may change, but yes, that was the expectation of even down to the young new green guys is, hey, we're going to give you your opportunities to step up and start to get your feet wet and try to prepare you for increased responsibility before their time was coming.
And when it comes to being a leader, right, you see it often where a leader in the corporate space believes that they have to make all the decisions. They have to do everything. They have to know everything. And often that leads to an environment where things kind of get tucked under the carpet. There's this expectation that I need to be amazing. Now I'm a leader. So within your role as a leader, how much in those first few years and all through your career, how much of your time was spent actually following as well as leading?
I think that's maybe kind of the misconception of leadership, right? Is you're always looking to, if you're the smartest guy in the room, like you're in the wrong room, right? Even if you're the leader, right? I might have had the title, but I had some incredibly talented dudes around me that I learned so much from. And it's finding, I think that's the art of leadership is when do you step in to that follower role? And then when do you step back into that leader role? And so I don't know that I can tell you, if there was a time ratio, but I think that, like I said, that's the art of, I think it's a constant balance of that. And again, a good, healthy dose of humility allows you to do that of going, hey, I care about the best idea wins. And if that means that he has a better understanding of this and he's got a good idea, like I'm going to let him run with this. I might be in charge, but let me follow in line here. Let give him the opportunity. Let him do this. And then my role really turned in when they were able to do those things is, hey, I could kind of be that safety net, right? I could coach and mentor if they were, hey, have you thought about this? Have you communicated this process? And just give them a couple of those nuggets. But it was that dynamic approach to leadership of you'd be in and follow when your time was to follow. And then, I'd pop back out and lead when they needed me to do the things that really only I could do in that. So I think it's a constant dance when you're thinking about doing that. But the best leaders that you've ever been around, you've ever watched, that's something that they're really, really good at.
And again, one of the leadership subjects that comes up often is working in an environment with a toxic leader. We have in the Marines, did you ever find yourself in a situation where you were actually working to somebody that was not a very effective leader? And if so, how do you sort of manage that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love our nation's veterans. At the same time, I've met some of the worst people in that in that world too, right? The military does not have it's got a plethora of some incredible leaders, but just like anywhere else, right? There's certainly a bench of poor leadership that you can learn from. And I think ultimately what that boils back down to is kind of that adage of you control what you can control, right? And where I've changed with that is going back to that saying of life's not about relationships. It's all about relationships. If I'm working with a toxic boss, or maybe it's just someone who approaches it differently than I am, I have to take the ownership of what role do I play in that? And how am I controlling certain things? And just one that kind of comes to my mind with that was in how I approached it and what I learned from that was more so he and I just had two totally different styles of communicating. And as a grunt, that interpersonal and kind of human atmospherics of leadership is very blunt, it's very direct, it's very immediate, and I like to talk to face. And different his style, it wasn't that. He appreciated seeing things through PowerPoints or through Excel spreadsheets. And for me, how I handled that was one, I was that buffer between some of the decisions and the things that they were making. I created that buffer for our team. And me and my command team, we kind of created that layer to shield the guys as much as we could from some of the just stuff that maybe I don't agree with it, or I don't like it, or I don't like the way it's delivered. We would handle that and create that buffer. But the biggest lesson that I learned was it's my responsibility to figure out how to build a relationship with them. And because sitting around and complaining and, hey, I don't like their style, or I don't like I'm not going to be able to change that. I can change my approach and how I show up to that. And so what I learned was rather than being mad and grumpy that he didn't communicate the way that I liked, or the way that I would argue is appropriate, and the style of high performing organizations and teams, that wasn't going to get me anywhere. It was just going to create negativity amongst the team. And so I took that, and the lesson that I still teach to this day is like, it's my job to learn how they communicate and then figure out how to do that. And the second that we did that, I don't like it. I don't like communicating through PowerPoint or Excel. But it's like, guess what? That's how I got everything across that we needed to get across. And that was how he just processed information. And me taking that step built our relationship to a point that dramatically increased the trust that he had in me. And so again, like that's how I would just I think that humility plays a part in that of any leader's journey of, I want it to be effective, and figuring out how I can build a relationship to mitigate some of that, or at least manage some of that quote unquote toxic type stuff, or the things that you might not like, or the things that are having a negative impact on your team. You as a leader, figure out how you change the way you show up and work that relationship. And you're going to be surprised, I think, at how much opportunities open up when you can have a somewhat of a relationship there.
And how much of that do you put down to a Joe thing versus being immersed in a culture, which is a culture that's about getting things done and to constantly solve problems and not blame?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a cultural piece of it, right? I mean, that's something that helps us with what we're doing. Is the consequences can be catastrophic in the Marine Corps, especially in combat. And when we everything was training and deploying and training and deploying. And so you kind of understood that the consequences that we were playing with for not getting this stuff right were heavy. And so I think that does play a part in allowing that stuff to happen, as to where, different organizations, you can, the consequences might not be human life. But I would argue in a lot of ways, when you look at turnover rates in organizations, disengaged employees, like there are some catastrophic things happening across organizations. And that, to me, that's all leadership. So I think that, the way, at least the lens that I look at that in, Boo, is this is how some of the highest performing teams worked and operated, where the stakes were the highest in combat. And if these principles and processes worked there, I've yet to find an industry that, at least those principles didn't apply in the business world or with athletics, you name it.
I want to explore two things. One is dealing with the unknown, because leadership is obviously, you're always going from where you are now to a situation that's unknown. I mean, if you're not doing that, you're not really leading, right? That's what a leader does. It takes people to a destination. And then secondly, so I'm going to come back to that. Within the structure of the Marines, you wouldn't show up with 42 men. That wouldn't be crystal clear around what their role is and how they contribute to a team, right? So how often in business do you see a team of people that really aren't quite sure as to what good looks like, what they actually have to do, that haven't been trained? And what do you think are like three of the core elements that was the culture that you're immersed in the training system that really made your job easier as a leader and as an opportunity for corporates?
Yeah. So everything that you just kind of hit there in my world, that revolves around communication, right? And one of the favorite kind of quotes that I go back to is, the problem with communication is the illusion that it's happening. And when you have, in our structure and how we would navigate through those things, is we would have some processes in place. But first, like when you can drive clarity up front and alignment throughout what we're doing, that changes the game, right? And we have checks on that to where we have a whole process and everybody's trained on this same briefing process. And that's a big piece of this too, right? We all kind of speak the same language, but we brief things, we do that. But right before we go out, like we've got other little techniques that we're spot checking this information. Do you, Boo, understand what happens if we go right instead of left? And if you don't know at that moment, I have a problem, right? I need to have a warm and fuzzy before we go out, that I've got clarity up front and alignment throughout. And I think on the business sector, where a lot of those things happen, it goes back to this top-down leader-follower network that's kind of created. Most people aren't really paying attention, or we're very...
It's almost the reverse, isn't it? It's almost what people perceive the military does is actually what corporates does. And I think you touched on it there, whereas communication and briefings is not the words that come out, it's how they're understood and implemented, right? And I think what the military does really well is that call to question, right? Like checks of understanding.
Yeah.
Is there anything around what I said that's unclear? But also the culture where someone can immediately put their hand up and you're not going to think you're an idiot, you weren't listening. Like, because we all hear differently, right? I always find it fascinating how people perceive communication, and you get a brief for speaking and they're like, oh, we just got to improve our communication. It's like, no one knows our strategy. It's okay, how did we've emailed it to everyone. We did a town hall. I'm like, yeah, but what did you do in terms of feedback? What engagement process did you have to ask people, do you understand your role? Do you need some more clarity? And I think that's such an important part. I got a brief for a client the other day, and they're like, look, we're just not sure we want to use you guys. You fighter pilots, you guys just follow checklists and standards, but we need our people to be flexible and to be thinking. And I'm like, how much harder would your job have been as a Marine leader if you didn't have checklists and you didn't have standards and you got into a situation that required flexibility?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's what in my opinion, that's what creates the flexibility, right? Because things are constantly going to be changing. Our world is getting more complex, not less complex, right? The things that we're navigating through, they're going to run into walls. And I think that's where I've watched that checklist stuff, the standardized processes. What that really does for us, at least on the ground side, I'm sure it's probably similar on the air side, is it made sure that we were never surprised by a predictable event. And so we don't have to give the brain power to the predictable things. We know this, we've got this stuff out, and now our brain power can just be used for those spaces of the ambiguity and the complexity and the uncertainty with things, because all these other things are set. So I think when you can navigate that, and you're right, we run into that same thing where it's like, oh, it's too militant. It's like, well, no, that gives the ordered thinking and the structure process to give us the freedom to go fight the battles that are going to come up in any project, in anything that you're doing. So I think without it, you start to fly blind in a lot of ways. But I still think in the communication process where it changes, again, it's how we communicate. And in the business world, where I see the same thing in the athletic clients that we work with, they are trained. I mean, I watch it with, my youngest, right? As they navigate up, like through our school systems, doesn't matter if it's early ed, middle school, high school, college, we create these kind of permission-based thinkers that don't make decisions for themselves unless they're told to do something. And we communicate this in a process where we tell them what to do. We tell them how to do it. Here's everything that I want done. Like, you just create someone who's doing your tasks for you. So we're in the military and we want people to think. I think General Patton, who was famous for saying that, is never tell your people how to do something. Tell them what to do and then step back and be surprised by their ingenuity. When you can learn to communicate, and we do that through intent-based leadership, when you can kind of communicate in this process, it drives that clarity and the understanding of what the heck we're doing and where we're going. And you can put standardization processes in there and checklists in there to know, hey, these things are set. We're not going to be surprised by predictable events. And now we've got the flexibility built in and clarity around what the heck we're doing. Now you start to unleash people's creativity. You start to unleash their thinking and their processes and their initiative with things just naturally if you communicate that way.
You see it in professional sports all the time, right? Like, we had the benefit of working with 19 NFL teams, and the ones that do really well master the things they can control. And you said it earlier, and then they adapt really quickly. And you see that all the time, right? You see the NFL teams that are full of talent, but there's a breakdown at the line of scrimmage, something really basic, and it doesn't allow the talent to shine. So let's go back to the unknown. I would imagine, I mean, I have no experience with this. Also, one thing I do want to talk about with standards as well is you and I can be operating in Iraq and Afghanistan together. I can be an Australian F-18. You can be a US Marine, and you and I can come to do business together instantaneously, having never met. You don't know how to fly my airplane. I don't know how to lead troops on the ground, but I can come to a troops in contact situation and immediately support you and get your job done.
That's right.
That to me is what an aligned organization is. When you can operate on a multinational basis, because people are like, you guys are all, you're Air Force guys. How do we operate as cross-functional teams?
Yep.
You guys don't have to worry about that as Air Force guys because you're all the one team. I'm like 90% of our job is working cross-functionally. It's working with the Army. It's working with Marines. It's working with Navy. It's working with government agencies. It's working with intelligence. Like, our whole world is actually operating on an integrated, highly remote global platform where we can apply pretty devastating power anywhere within 24 hours. And who wouldn't want that in a business? Like, I just find it astonishing that people would say, we don't want that.
That's right. Well, that's why I say if it works where the stakes are the highest, it works across any other industry. And, as a ground force commander, you're exactly right. Like, and it's hard to do when everything's going right. But that was never when we would show up. And I talk about this, like, this is the varsity level of leadership on this side. And if you don't have those structures in place, One, the reason that people don't want the structures is because they're not thinking cross-functionally. They're only thinking in their side.
Well, they don't want to either because it's disciplined, it's habits.
That's right. But I did that all the time. And it was, to your point earlier, as troops in contact, as a ground force commander, like I'm typically not talking to the Australian pilot. I had French support. I obviously had US support in different areas, but as a pilot checks in, it's because we're having a pretty bad day down there on the ground and navigating a very complex situation of maneuvering multiple squads in different areas. We're in a gunfight. And now I have to quickly connect with you and you check in on station and find, hey, how much fuel do you have? Well, how much time on station? What are you bringing to the fight here? Where are we? Where are all my people? So like it becomes super, super complex. But if you have those standards, that allows us to have that conversation in 15 to 20 seconds to give you the information you need, me the information I need. And now we're working together in order to accomplish the mission.
If you're enjoying the show, I'd just like to ask of you a little favor. We're on a mission here to ignite the world's leadership potential. We need to reach out to as many leaders as we possibly can. So if you're enjoying the show, I just ask you to leave a review, to subscribe, to help introduce this podcast to other leaders to join you on your journey to flawless leadership. We're going to head back to the episode now. I hope you've enjoyed what you've learned today. Please remember, let's ignite a movement of flawless leaders. Subscribe, leave a review. Let's get back to the show. And it's high trust, right? Like it's literally super high trust. And then you also get the benefit of those two different perspectives, right? Like I can't see in a window and you can't see from the top down. So, like multifunctional teams where you deliberately try and break it up and bring in different perspectives is so incredibly powerful because those two pictures and those two same problem set, different perspectives, and is where you start to become incredibly. I see this building next to the white building. Well, I only see gray roofs. I see a road. Oh yeah, I'm on that road. Oh, okay. So I can't even see what it is where you need me to lay down some ordnance, but I'm going to trust you and you're going to trust me and I know where you are and let's just see what happens. And then boom, with powerful effect. I want to go back to the unknown because now with the speed of business and that's just going to keep accelerating, a lot of businesses feel like they just don't know how to deal with the unknown. Now, I have very limited experience with this in Afghanistan, running around in a crappy old Hyundai in a business, waiting for someone to put a grenade in the window or hitting an IED. And I had one of my team killed by an IED in near Kandahar. But we never had big signs on the back of us saying, hey, look at this. See this big green and black and sand-colored truck? Yeah, here's a big poster to do something really bad to me. Tell me a little bit about how to lead a team in that kind of unknown where you're on a patrol and you're basically rolling dice, right? In terms of an IED. How do you keep the team motivated? How do you get the job done? How do you deal with that kind of significant consequence of the unknown?
Yeah, I think this, I look at this when I said that earlier of when you look at your team and you have this understanding of they don't need a friend, they need a leader. We called that the burden of command because that often means you're making a lot of very tough decisions for your team. And so I think when you think of the unknown, where I lean into that is I want teams, leaders, everybody to be intentional in their preparation. I think you can navigate the unknown much better and much more efficiently if you prepare properly. And, we had a big mural on our wall at our unit when I checked in and said, let no man's ghost ever return to say, had I only been trained. And as a young commander, man, that hits you, right? And what I think about this is going back to the predictable events is I might not know the unknown, but I know a lot of the complexities and a lot of things that we may face, or am I learning about other units? Hey, what have they've done this before? What did they experience? What are they seeing? If I'm collecting that information, the challenge becomes, how do I press and demand excellence out of my team to make sure that we're ready for that unknown? And there are times where, some guys get it, right? But they're down to train, they're doing these things, but a lot of times it's uncomfortable, right? And I can think of where we train, it's hot, it's 120 degrees. You put in 50 pounds of kit on, hey, we're going to train like we fight. We're putting all this personal protective equipment on, gloves, helmets, all these things. The guy's like, why? Why can't we just go out there in t-shirts, right? And those are those little tiny battles, I think, are what define your future. And those are the moments when you get tested as a leader to go, hey, because when we do face that unknown, like we're not going to be sitting out there in a t-shirt somewhere, right? And being able to learn how to do those little things. And I can think of a lot of little different types of decisions like that in the preparation phase where, oh, by the way, as a leader, sure, you're getting pulled, those heartstrings are getting pulled too, where it's like, man, I just want to care on the guy. I just want to love on the guys right now. Like they've been working hard. I don't want to grind too hard with them. I don't want to ask them to do these things. But again, as their leader, I need them to be prepared because the unknown is going to be very, very uncomfortable. And so how we would prepare, the visualization that we would do, we would talk through different scenarios of things that we might face. And I just try to get their brains going on some of the stuff. And then we would go practice and rehearse these things so that my goal was, while we couldn't prepare for everything, we would at least limit some of the unknown. And when you found yourself into a situation that you weren't expecting, you've at least seen it or a variation of it in the preparation phase.
And again, no doubt, any scenario that was unknown that may happen, were also prepared for and dealt with that. I mean, did you have a situation where something completely unexpected happened, and how did you make a decision and deal with that?
Yeah, every day, right? So every day there was something new. You know, they're saying, at least on the ground side, no plan survives first contact. And this kind of goes back to what you're saying with the standards and the expectations, the standard operating procedures that we would have. Is there was never a day that we experienced something unknown and we were making everything up as we were going on, right? There might have been gaps to where it's like, well, this situation happened. We're reacting to this the best that we can, but then we get it to here. Well, now we know what to do here, right? And for instance, you know, someone who walked on a minefield and operated in IEDs everywhere. So guys were getting wounded or guys were getting killed. Those things could rapidly grow into a completely chaotic and unknown and uncontrolled situation. Well, we get control of that immediate situation, and then we're back into the SOPs, right? Well, now we know we're to a process that we've already planned for, we've already talked about, we've already prepared for. So I think the goal, again, in that preparation side is take out as much of the unknown as you can through your preparation. So that way, when you do face that, you're just navigating, okay, hey, this looks a little bit similar to this. We can execute this.
And come back to normal, like have something normal. Because I constantly find this with sales teams, right? Where it's like a no, or the probability of win is so low. I think we're kind of used to winning, which is a good thing on our team in the military, I think. And there's like zero learning. And I see it in professional sports as well, where there's a fumble or there's a mistake and people go, oh, that's just football. Oh, we always have errors in a game. It's to be expected. I don't think we approach the world that way, though.
Yeah.
I think that we see everything as an opportunity to learn. So talk a little bit about that, like how you cultivated that culture of learning, and not just learning, but the application of those learnings, and both you as a leader, but organizationally.
That's right. So I think in that process it's both ways, right? So scaling that back individually, I'm a big believer in kind of a reflective practice, right? And taking those moments to kind of do that self-reflection and what just happened, what was I trying to do, where am I right now, just kind of a self-check-in, right? And doing that routinely. And I think far too often that can scare a lot of people, to be really, really honest with themselves of, you know, where do we actually stand on that? How did I do in that event? Or was I ready? And I think, you know, the art of self-reflection should not scare you. I think not doing one should. Right? Because now we're just willy-nilly just going with the flow. But with our team, that is a cultural non-negotiable, is we will be doing debriefs after everything. And I know you guys do it. And it is I've told it to, I think a debrief is the single greatest tool when done properly. It's the single greatest tool to accelerate organizational and individual growth. And I know you guys have preached it. I preach it everywhere I go, and I could probably hold up one hand how many teams or individuals that I think have put this into.
Even professional sports teams that think they're doing it, they're still not. It's not learning. It's just direction.
It's direction.
That's all the correction. That's the right language. Or it's an opportunity to look the smartest person on the team or be the smartest coach. It's kind of like those cognitive muscles don't click, which allow you to say, here's what was supposed to happen. That didn't happen. Now let's get really curious as to why, and start with my accountability. And I love how you started this whole podcast where you said, at the end of the day, it's me. If there's a commander that's not great, it's me. I got to translate that to be effective. And I think with learning, it's the same. If you don't empower an individual to get curious and allow them to come up with the conclusion, then they're not going to learn it. Sure, you're going to have to, if you're experienced and you're a coach, you're going to maybe have to shepherd the process. But I feel like in professional sports and in business, it's like you made a mistake, do it this way next time. And it's like, but I thought I was doing that. Then you just start to get this bubble of like mistrust and hiding things. And it's like, well, I don't want to have that experience again. And then you make the same mistake. And it's like, well, I'm going to have to hide that happened because I don't want to go in front of my boss and be told to do the same thing the third time when fundamentally I don't understand it. My leader doesn't know I understand it. And again, both in your practice now and as a Marine, how important is the action part of the lesson? So not just the learning bit, but actually applying it.
That is the magic, right? And so going back to that, if I think that, hey, I can count on one hand the amount of teams that consistently do a debrief, I can probably count on one finger the amount of teams that fix the implementation, right? So as I kind of look at that, you in the circle of the debrief, you've got the preparation aspect, you've got the execution, then hey, the good teams are doing a debrief, but then you have to have this implementation. And before we start this prep cycle again, and so many teams miss that. She said they just correct certain things here, but I think that goes back to ego, right? Me as the leader, if I'm leading this debrief, am I just correcting everybody and telling them they did this? Everything that you just said was right, spot on. And I think so many people miss that opportunity to go, no, let me take the step back, facilitate this debrief, but I want to learn why. Why are they making the decision that they made? I've learned more by doing that, Boo, because I get an insight into where their head's going. And sometimes you start to see this like, man, if I would have stepped in, I would have corrected you on that. But the reality is, I loved where you're going with that. Oh, we just missed this step on that. Hey, now I can coach and mentor that, right? And it's guiding them in how we're tracking this so that the next time before we step into the prep cycle, are we looking at, hey, the things that we figured out in this debrief, what did we change? Putting, the measurable pieces of that, the timeline pieces of that, tasking specific individuals that hey, you were responsible for this now, or you were responsible for this. That implementation piece is the magic piece. And so many people will get into that cycle and they skip the implementation, and all they're doing is repeating the same things, and they get corrected in the debrief. It's like, let's fix it with honesty and be completely egoless. And I think that's the big area in a debrief where I always run into people. I'm like, well, I just want to ask you straight up, because some people will be totally honest with me. I'm like, would you rather be right, or do you want it to be effective? That changes the way that we're going to approach this debrief, right? I would hope you'd say, hey, I want it to be effective. And if so, most leaders that I know, hey, there's some things that come out, or you want to sit there and your teammates willing to say, hey, boss, I need you to do more of this and less of this. And that would allow us to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And I think that openness to learning as a leader as well, rather than hold on to that expectation that I should know everything.
Yeah.
That becomes harder as a leader. And I think I went through a phase where, I tried to be that leader, and then you realize that actually it's vulnerability, and being the leader says, hey, I actually don't know. I don't know what the best thing.
That's so good, Boo. That is a piece that so many miss. And having the courage to say that too is where a lot of inexperienced leaders don't want to admit that.
Yeah. And I just remember having this leader, this fighter pilot, back when I was like in my early 20s. And this leader said, I don't know more than they said, I do know, or would say, you'd ask them a question about, what parameters, I've never used this weapon. What parameters should I use? And he's like, have you read the TAC manual? Have you read the book? I'm like, no. And he goes, read the book. And if you don't understand it, come back. And also that self-guided learning. I mean, I thought he was a bit of an asshole at first, because I'm like, just answer the question. But what I now value in that is that, actually his best interests were you get curious. And just because you're trained as a fighter pilot now, that's not the end of the journey, man. You're at the start. You know how to not crash into the ground, not crash into your leader, and be in the right place at the right time. But for you now, the key skill you're going to have to be the most effective leader in this organization is self-guided learning. And if you have a question, come at me with what you think is the answer. Then let's have a conversation. In your career, do you recall like one or two times, or a time where you just was the toughest moment that you'd ever experienced and had to make the toughest decision you've ever made?
There's a couple, there's a couple different ones. And typically once I kind of left the infantry side of the house on our pathway, and I ended up commanding up at Paris Island, which is a notorious Marine Corps boot camp. So I was in charge now of 50 plus drill instructors and overseeing a couple hundred plus different recruits that were through there. It was that was a leadership laboratory for me, right? Is now you've got some savvy, some more experienced Marines. And in my opinion, when they were,
but you're also at the coalface of a learning curve, right? Where you're taking in a young man or woman who just like literally had never had a haircut that tight before.
Yeah, that's right. And look, my opinion is for them to do their job the right way, they're walking a pretty tight line, because it's just not effective if they pull back off of that line. But it's also really easy to go over that line. And in that world, trying to build influence with guys who, like, as the commander, they're like, I'm not a drill instructor. I don't go through their course and is incredibly demanding. They're some of the most disciplined Marines disciplined people in life that I've ever been around. But it's easy.
And there's some pretty broken people, right, that use the Marines to turn their life around.
100%. Yeah? We've seen all different types of walks come through there. But that's the beauty of it, of how it works when you give the structure and you give the standards and you give the discipline, you give the clarity. Hey, the Marine Corps just sets it up. This is the bar. This is what it looks like to be one of us. Come do that. And if you do these things,
and people crave that.
They love it.
Give me something to run towards.
That's right. And so when they're constantly balancing on this line, and those, so I'd make a lot of those decisions where sometimes you'd have a guy he's just underperforming. And those, in my opinion, are easy to hold the line on. It was other guys who were maybe crossing the line. And I can think of one in particular he was crossing the line, but it wasn't malicious. It was inexperience. And he was just trying to be as good as he could be, but he was kind of lacking some of the experience in how to control that and have it fully. He was more of a floodlight than a laser beam, but he was doing things that were going to cost him his career. And I made the decision to sit him down, which if you take a Marine Corps drill instructor, they wear different belts and their campaign covers. If you take their cover and their belt away, it's like taking Superman's cape away. They work incredibly hard to do that, and it's not a good look for them. But making that decision not only impacted him, but in just the way that world worked at the time, it had a tremendous, even pulling one hat out of the group, it had a tremendous impact on the entire company. So everybody's having to take more strain because it's a 24/7 job, right? So everybody's having to take more strain. It means, one less night a week that they get to have dinner with their family, whatever it is. And so it impacted the entire company. I knew it wasn't going to be a popular decision, but again, leader, not a friend, right? And the friend in me, the guy who human instinct wants to be liked. You don't want to ruffle everybody's feathers. You kind of root for them, right? To figure this out so you don't have to do these things. But the leader was, hey, this is the line. You're over it. And it pulled him out. And I sat him down, and I can remember, he did not think highly of me, right, at the time for doing that. I had a number of guys who I did trust in the company come to me and kind of voice their opinion of what they thought of it. But again, if you're rooted in, I understand my code of conduct. I understand the type of leader that I want to be, the absolute, unequivocally unwavering integrity with what is a non-negotiable in my style. And so when you understand your code of conduct and the type of leader that you want to be, you can now, that's what you lean on in order to align your actions, regardless of the circumstances. Align your actions to the vision and values that you stand for. That drives desired outcomes. And so in the face of having guys come to me and share their opinions and share their thoughts on it, but had enough respect at the time where when I told them this is my decision, they felt comfortable that I heard what they had to say and they went out and they executed. And, as a leader, no one ever comes up to you and is like, oh man, we appreciate, how good of a job you're doing, right? Like it can be very, very.
When does that ever happen?
Doesn't happen. And oftentimes it comes back years later. And I'll tell you 2 or 3 years later, about 2.5 years after that day and after that company, he was leaving the island. He came by and shook my hand and it said, if you had not have done that, I would not be leaving here with my career intact. Like he kind of knew the path that he was going down. And again, not malicious at all. It was just that the nature of that environment can kind of allow guys to kind of go over the line a little bit. And so those are just tough when you're impacting individuals, right? And there's probably a plethora of different examples I can think of on the combat.
But I think what you've done there, and I think, again, where we look at decision making as leaders of the military, it's a decision around what's the common good. Like, what is the consequence of this decision net?
Right.
Is it going to hurt? And I think this is really a really important lesson for businesses to take, because there's a lot of high performing toxic individuals that leaders are afraid of having that conversation with, right? And their numbers are higher and everyone else's might be lower because they're talented. They're kind of mean, they're bullying, because they're the bulldozer personality. And you will succeed in life if you're a bulldozer and have zero empathy. I mean, yeah, that's why psychopaths run the world. I think it's really insightful and valuable for a leader to know, in terms of credibility, like having values and making decisions and credibility, how many years it takes to become a credible leader. It's not something that happens. The popular decisions don't necessarily breed credibility. They just breed comfort. And in that moment, how two things happen, right? One, you made a decision for the collective good, which is always, that's what leader's job, right? That's what leadership's all about. And two, your values supported that decision, and you establish credibility, because 2 or 3 years later, look what happens, right? And I remember being on the receiving end of one of those. I got a warning for being a bit too much of a cowboy, and I didn't like it at the time. But geez, it made me a much better fighter pilot afterwards. And that leader went on to be the deputy chief of the Air Force, right? And that I have the utmost respect for that leader. They didn't do it in a way that was punitive. It wasn't because he and I had a personal problem. It was well defined. It was like, here's the real. It was a debrief, but it was like a behavioral debrief, yep. Which is like, look, here's what's going on. Here's the benchmark. Here's where you're going. You and I know that that's not, as we would say, crisp. That's not where we need to be. So this is a warning, and you've got to come back to the normalized, because you will die. You will kill someone if you don't come in. That's, again, that consequence isn't in business. It's not in the athlete world either.
Well, but it is in a sense, right? Because two things happen with that. And, as you just talked about it, that's what drives respect, right? Is when I talk about friend, I call it likership versus leadership. They don't need a friend, they need a leader. When you do make those very tough, difficult leadership decisions, ultimately that's what drives respect. But more importantly, it drives trust. And because everything you're doing, you're being tested by your team, right? They're constantly testing you, and they're watching. They're not foolish, right? They're smart people. I'm yet to meet a company that makes a habit out of hiring, dumb or stupid people, right? No, we work really hard to find talented people. Well, they're watching how you handle certain scenarios. And oh, by the way, they're watching when you cower away from the tough decisions and what they do. So when you can hold the line and do all the things that you just outlined, it drives trust. In where you see that, yes, it doesn't necessarily show up in, in our world, KIAs or things like that in combat. It is manifesting itself in turnover rate, unemployed employees, and
results, just basic results.
Right. Well, in the sport world, we're seeing that a lot in the transfer portal. One of the things that I lean into is, you can't pour into others from an empty cup. And so when a lot of times employee leaves, talented employee, it's normal, they go somewhere else. As a leader, that should impact you, right? Everything that you are entrusted with as a leader should be growing and thriving. They should be feeling the impact of your leadership on a daily basis. And in order to do that, you have to be constantly developing. And the amount of people that I talk to that, hey, what are you doing? Are you listening to Boo? Are you reading books? Or do you have a coach that's kind of pouring into these things? The amount of people who that answer is no, they're just showing up, and they're great people showing up and, hey, just being a good person and doing the best you can. In a lot of cases, it's not good enough. And what's happening are these young athletes are coming up, they're trying to drink from the cup and it's empty. And so they're leaving because they're going to try to find another cup that's full, or the same things happen in a job, right? The grass is always greener at these other places. We as leaders need to find a way to make sure that everything we're entrusted with is growing and thriving, and you'll have those teams constantly coming back to the trough for more.
All right, mate, we're getting to the end of the commute for whoever's listening to this. I'm going to ask you just a real simple question. Okay, so you're a leader, you're in a corporate team, and your team's not engaged. You're not doing a good job as leader. What would you kind of recommend as the 1, 2, or 3 things to kind of do a hard reset and bring everything back on track?
One, I think you had mentioned this earlier, at least internally, is the vulnerability piece. If you are seeing it, I promise you they are seeing it. And so do you have the humility and the vulnerability as a leader to bring the team together, lay that out, and start to figure out why?
And I think it's as easy as saying, hey, guys, look, let's all come into a room. Let's get on. This is not working, guys. Clearly, we're not gelling. Things aren't happening here. You're working hard. I'm working hard. Let's just, what do we need to fix? No names, no rank, no pack drills, just brutally honest here. That conversation could be a game changer.
Right? I think it's where you start. And I think there's so many people that they know they need to do that, but that takes courage to do, right? Because again, as a leader, that's you sitting there going, I'm ultimately responsible for everything that happens or fails to happen. And I'm bringing you guys in here to telling you, hey, this isn't working. But I think...
Okay, so step one, admit it. Step two, what do you think the first thing you do as a leader to start to reestablish credibility in that conversation?
You have to pull in those that you trust. And so I think doing that in a larger group, but then also doing that in a smaller group to sit here and go, hey, I need the feedback, right? Where are you, the guys that I trust, where can I give you more, right? And ultimately, the problem is when leaders feel that, my instinct is to tell them step two is give control. Don't take control, give control. So bring those trusted leaders in, find opportunities in areas where you can give them control to start, again, leveraging their brains, leveraging their experience and their ideas to go out and control these. That will calm the waters more, in my opinion, than, hey, it's not going well. Let me pull everything back to the ship and let me try to drive this. So step two would be give control.
And then finally, how do you grow from that point on? How do you take that building block and then turn it into a building?
I think everything's in training, right? And so I think that's both internally and externally. So training is everything, and everything can be training. So finding those opportunities to develop your team. And so I think that's stuff that you do internally, but obviously in what I do and what you do, I'm a big believer in the outside eyes and the outside perspective, because there's things that you may be doing in your organization that it's just a blind spot for you because it's what you've seen, it's what you've done for so long. But as you know, I go in, I kind of call myself the fun uncle, right? It's because we can come in and say something. And the bosses are always like rolling their eyes and throwing their hands like, I've been saying this for 3 years.
Yeah, it's true.
It's just
fun uncle.
They hear it from a different voice. There's a different level of credibility with our backgrounds and the things that we've done. But, we can say the same things or just deliver it a little bit differently. And now it clicks. And so I think that third piece is training, and it's give your team internal training, find opportunities. It doesn't have to be long. It could be 15 minutes, but use things that naturally happen throughout your day as training opportunities and give people an opportunity to do things. Areas where, if they fail, it's not a big deal. And we find that, and it gives us an opportunity to coach and mentor that. But I think that part of that training is also going, who can we leverage to come in and help us from the outside to give us a little boost on, because not everything, the world's not falling. Like not everything is bad. We've got a lot of good things. Well, how can we accelerate the good things we're doing by kind of managing or mitigating some of the bad things we're doing along that process? And I think that external eyes or that external set of things can also help accelerate that in the training component.
Yeah, I think because we internalize it, right? And I think one of the best advice I ever got was in business in Afghanistan, that my business partner was a parachute regiment captain in the British Army. And he said, man, at the end of the day, nothing's ever as good or as bad as it seems at first.
That's right.
To help moderate that kind of emotional space, which is another conversation, but we might just have to do another podcast on emotional regulation as a leader. Hey, Joe, thanks so much for coming on The Few with me, mate. It was just a absolute goldfield of leadership nuggets right there. Mate, how can people find you?
LinkedIn is the best spot for me. And then if there's interesting or people interested in some of the other thought leadership and the things that we do, our website is ironleaderteam.com.
Awesome, man. Please reach out, connect with Joe, particularly, if you're in the sporting field, you're maybe a professional athlete, or you may be an athlete that feels like their coach needs a tune up, or maybe that you're a coach of a team. You're just wondering why it's not gelling. I know that you've got some pretty deep experience there as a leadership advisor. Remember, folks, please leave a review. Make sure you like the podcast, whatever platform you're reading, to make sure we can keep getting phenomenal leaders on the show to share their personal life experience and, more importantly, what they've learned along the way. Joe, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Loved it, Boo. Thanks, bud.